Today, we're going to get into a story about what happens after a person's sentence is served. This is the story of Carol Alden, a really celebrated artist who, well, lost everything, went to prison for 13 years, and is now trying to build a life from scratch way out in the Utah desert. And her story, it really forces us to ask a tough question. What does a second chance truly cost?
There's no place else for me to be. That's what Carol Alden says about this remote, off-grid ranch of hers. I mean, when you look at this landscape, you kind of have to wonder, why here? What on earth happened in her life that made this desolate, harsh patch of desert the only place she could actually call home? To figure that out, we've got to go back.
So let's start with a crisis. We're going to jump to June of 2025, a point where this fragile existence she's managed to build for herself is literally about to go up in smoke.
Okay, I want you to picture this. The sky is so thick with smoke you can't see more than, say, 50 yards in front of you. The winds are just howling at 50 miles an hour, and somewhere in that haze, a massive wildfire is creeping closer and closer. For Carol, all alone out here, the first and only warning she's going to get is this faint orange glow on the horizon.
And just think about what's on the line here. It's not just the land, it's her 200 free-roaming chickens, her goats, her entire menagerie of animals, but it's so much more than that. This is the only home that would have her, a sanctuary she was forced to build for herself because, well, the rest of the world had completely shut her out.
To really get how she ended up in this spot, we need to rewind the tape. Way back. Before the desert, before the prison sentence, Carol Alden lived a totally different life. She was a celebrated artist. Her art actually began with these dreams she had as a child. She would dream of these giant, prehistoric fish swimming around her in these dark waters. But here's the thing. They weren't scary monsters to her. No, they were her protectors. In those dreams, she felt safe. A feeling, it turns out, she would spend the rest of her life trying to find again.
And she didn't just keep these protectors in her dreams. She brought them to life. I'm not talking about paintings. She was a sculptor of monsters. She'd be welding metal, stitching giant pieces of fabric together to create these enormous, whimsical creatures that just captivated everybody, from serious art curators to just regular people.
And this was the absolute peak. A 96-foot-long dragon, her creation, floating majestically on a pond as the centerpiece of a huge arts festival. It was a moment of just pure, absolute triumph. But it was also the moment right before everything fell apart.
Because just as she was hitting this incredible high point in her career, her entire world came crashing down around her. I mean, just look at this timeline. It is staggering. In June of 2006, she's this acclaimed artist. Just 1 month later, after what sources describe as years of documented escalating domestic abuse, she shoots and kills her husband. And by 2007, she wasn't an artist anymore. She was inmate number 158541.
So for the next 13 years, prison was her reality. But there was one thing that nobody could take away from her, that deep, non-negotiable drive to create art. And honestly, it became her lifeline.
You know, Carol had this really sharp observation about the psychology of prison life. She said the men's prison was basically an education in brutality, but the women's prison, that was an education in loss, a place just dominated by sadness and anxiety.
But even in that environment, she had to create. As she puts it, though, making art in prison is incredibly difficult. It's fraught with angst. Imagine facing endless bureaucracy, guards who would just confiscate your materials for no reason. But she kept going, and that persistence led to her most famous piece from that time, the Fish House. The Fish House wasn't just some sculpture. It was basically a crocheted dream of the future. It was a little mobile home about the size of a doormat, shaped like one of her protective sea creatures. And inside, she imagined this perfect life waiting for her. A jacuzzi in the tail, a kitchen that grew its own fresh tomatoes, and a way to finally reconnect with the family she'd lost.
Now, get this. Without her even knowing, Carol's daughter entered the Fish House into a big statewide art contest. And it won. Best in Show. It came with a $1,000 prize. Can you imagine? It was this stunning validation that proved that even behind bars, her talent was just undeniable. The state of Utah even bought it for its permanent collection.
So in 2019, Carol was released, but she very quickly found out she'd only traded one prison for another. The walls were invisible now, but they were just as real.
This is the label that followed her everywhere. Violent felon.
It's more than a label, it's a brand. And it slams almost every door shut in your face. No jobs, no housing. The source material even notes that some street medics have a name for people with this label: lepers at the gate. You are literally pushed to the absolute fringe of society. And this is Carol's powerful and pretty bleak conclusion from all this. For all the talk we hear about rehabilitation, society often treats certain sentences as life sentences. The debt, in her experience, is never really considered paid.
The crazy thing is, she was actually released to a world that seemed full of opportunity. Museum exhibitions and lectures were all lined up. And then the pandemic hit. Everything was canceled. And just like that, her bright future completely vanished, leaving her adrift with nothing.
And that brings us right back to where we started, the desert. Pushed to the very edge by society, she basically decided to leave it all behind and build her own world from scratch, a place where she and her animals could finally, maybe, be safe.
I mean, this just shows you the sheer will and desperation it took. She cobbled together a down payment from a stimulus check and some old speaking fees. And her plan for the monthly payments? She was going to sell her own blood plasma. And she bought this piece of land, her last best hope, completely sight unseen.
But out there on the fringe, she found a community that the mainstream world had denied her. A creative builder from the Burning Man scene and, you're not going to believe this, a retired FBI agent. These were people who looked right past the label, saw her humanity, and actually helped her turn this patch of dirt into a real home. And that really brings us full circle. This isn't just a ranch she's living on, it's her sanctuary. A place that was born from desperation but has finally given her some sense of peace. It's her little safe spot, and she's just trying to share it with a few critters and a few people she can trust.
Carol Alden's story really leaves us with a tough question, doesn't it? We like to talk about people paying their debt to society, but her journey shows that for some, the payments never, ever end. The price of that so-called second chance becomes a lifetime of struggle and isolation, of literally having to build your own world because the old one has cast you out. So it makes you wonder, what is the real cost of starting over?